joined by the one and only Paul Stamets. Paul is a mycologist, speaker, author, medical researcher, and advocate for the potential of fungi. He is an expert on the interconnectedness of nature and the transformative power of mushrooms in agriculture, biosecurity, and longevity. Paul has authored 7 books, including Mycelium Running, How Mushrooms Can Help Save the World, and Growing Gourmet and Medicinal Mushrooms. He is a collaborator with numerous scientific organizations and research institutes. His research is considered breakthrough by thought leaders for creating a paradigm shift for helping ecosystems worldwide. Paul is an invention ambassador for the American Association for the Advancement of Science and was inducted into the Explorers Club in 2020. He has received numerous awards, including the National Mycologist Award in 2013 from the North American Mycological Association, the Gordon and Tina Wasson Award in 2015, from the Mycological Society of America, and the Disruptor Award from NextMed earlier this year. He has named 4 new species of psilocybin mushrooms, and this year, a new psilocybin mushroom species was named after him to honor his lifelong work, Psilocybe stametsi. Paul's work has inspired and influenced scientists, environmentalists, and individuals interested in the role of fungi in shaping a sustainable future. And with that, we welcome you, Paul.
Thank you, Burton. Honored to be here. And wow, this movement has just taken off. What a surprise. We were so much in the underground before, sort of literally and figuratively, and now we're above ground, just like mycelium producing a mushroom. So it's fruiting all over the world now. So it's great to be here. I'm excited to talk to you.
Well said, and we're so happy to have you. Can you please start by sharing your personal journey and what inspired you to explore your passion for mycelium and fungi?
Well, I was always attracted to the forbidden fruit, and mushrooms fit in that category. My family was mycophobic, the fear of fungi. So I think a lot of people have heard the story, but my brother John really was my inspiration. He died a few years ago, but he went to Yale and he went down to Central and South America and came back with these amazing stories of tripping on psilocybin mushrooms. And he was my oldest brother. I was, 7 years younger than him. So I was really excited and thrilled by his stories of adventure. And so being the younger brother, I just sort of picked up this subject with a passion and was able to inform my older brother of how to identify, because he was not adept at identification. So he relied upon me for a lot of field trips, you might say. And also he was my tripping buddy. John and I, tripped a lot on psilocybin. So, and he was a major intellectual giant. And the guy was so smart. It's not just, in fact, there's an age difference. I mean, he was an intellectual giant. So.
Thank you for that. Now, we are going to go on a journey today, and before we dive into the inquiries pertaining to psilocybin and magic mushrooms, I thought we could do a little bit of Mycology 101 and first talk about functional mushrooms. Can you kindly provide an overview of the varied health benefits of mushrooms like lion's mane, turkey tail, chaga, and reishi?
Yeah, I'll cover some of those. Let me share a screen here, okay? I commissioned this art here because I think it really drives the point home that mycelium is everywhere. And it's this underground network, all of you know about that. But it navigates through a microbially hostile environment. These cells are only 1 cell wall thick. And a mushroom is composed of mycelium. So mycelium fruits creates a fruit body, which is sporulating. But a lot of these mushrooms, like the garden giant and amanitas in the background, psilocybes, they rot in 4 or 5 days. The polypore mushrooms are more persistent. They'll stay around for months and sometimes years. But mushrooms are highly perishable. They don't really have a good immune system, but the mycelium does, and it has to. Mushrooms produce spores. Spores come together, they mate, they form the mycelium. But this part of the life cycle is 99.9% of the organism's life cycle, mushroom, the organism. So And then the mycelium under the right conditions, a drop in temperature, rain, addition of water, evaporative cooling is associated with rain, so that's a drop in temperature. The mycelium comes up, exhales carbon dioxide, inhales oxygen, and surprisingly light, not with button mushrooms, not so much with enoki mushrooms, but the vast majority of mushrooms need to have light stimulation, even though they have no chlorophyll, but that triggers them into mushroom formation. So we described the parts of the mushroom as mushroom spores, mushroom mycelium, mushroom fruit body. Well, why do we say mushroom as a qualifier as well as a noun? Because there could be mold spores. There could be mold mycelium. There could be algae spores, bacterial spores. I mention this because there was this strange, confusing, bewildering, frankly, I don't know if I should call it propaganda or just misinformation, that you can't use the word mushroom with mycelium. It's a marketing thing. So for us scientists, that makes no sense at all. You always want to qualify the part of the mushroom to distinguish it from molds or algae or ferns, et cetera. So, but this is really, I think, is a take home for many of you. You mentioned lion's mane and reishi. So look how many more genes are being expressed at the mycelial state versus the fruit body only state. I mean, it's phenomenal, a higher number of genes are being expressed. And that's because it speaks to the armamentarium of the mycelium being able to have an immune system, a host defense against pathogens. The mushrooms won't form unless the mycelial mat is grown. So you have to have the mycelium first. So it navigates through this microbial hostile environment and actually selects guilds of cooperating bacteria. So it's a prebiotic and a probiotic, and sets up guilds of alliances with bacteria that then are synergistically together, are able to repel pathogens. So these set up microbial communities. They're really the vanguard species in many ecosystems that create a cascade of increasing biodiversity that then support the ecosystem that gives rise to the plants and the trees that create the debris fields that feed the mycelium. So upon sporulation, they travel. But the mycelial mat can be resident. I have a chanterelle patch. I've had it for 30, 40 years. It's not going away. It's a mycorrhizal with trees. But many of the saprophytic species, including the psilocybin, lion's mane, reishi, it needs this constant renewal of detritus, of debris falling down to feed the mycelium. So, but anyhow, so I'll stop there. We'll dance around this little, there's only 12 slides in this PowerPoint. I'm not going to overwhelm you with slides, but these I think are quite pertinent to our discussion.
That's great. A really nice overview. And I do have some questions that really navigate some of the intricacies of psilocybin. But before we get into that, I'm aware that you have a company called Fungi Perfecti, where there are different supplements inclusive of lion's mane and reishi and turkey tail. So I'm curious if you could provide some of the health benefits and when these mushrooms might have utility for certain indications.
Yeah, I'm not a medical doctor. I cannot make medical recommendations. I can refer you to the scientific literature. My populated website with my research team. I have 145 employees. I've got about 7 full-time researchers. And it's at mushroomreferences.com. It's constructed specifically for physicians and researchers. It's, mushroomreferences.com. There's no branding. It's just pure science. It's also not only talks about the benefits of mushrooms, but also effects that are negative. So it's not just all pro mushrooms. It talks about contraindications and things like that. But it's over 1,000 pages long, I think now. So it's a deep resource. If people want to look up the health benefits of mushrooms, then mushroomreferences.com is great. I can say that because of the biochemistry of the mushrooms, when they produce these fruit bodies, as we consume the mycelium or the mushrooms, it activates different receptors. And as I mentioned, turkey tail is a prebiotic for the microbiome in your stomach. And some very, very interesting double-blind placebo-controlled studies with patients who have amoxicillin treatment. They destroy the microbiome in their stomach. And they found the mycelium of turkey tail was a fantastic prebiotic, reestablishing the beneficial bacteria and suppressing Clostridium, Staphylococcus, and other inflammatory bacteria. So that's really interesting because I believe habitats and humans share immune systems. And what's so fascinating to me is that these mushrooms in the ecosystem are also selecting beneficial bacteria, and yet the ecosystem of our stomachs, they also have a similar influence. So I see this very as a unanimity of concepts, that there's sort of a transparency and a fluidity of what's happening in the soil, the ecosystem, in the forest, and what's happening in our own bodies. So anyhow, I'll touch on some of those, but I think mushroomreferences.com is a great resource. We upload about every week or so, and lots of information on lion's mane, lots on reishi, chaga, lots on psilocybin mushrooms.
Super cool. I love it. Now, let's talk about psychedelics. There's an appropriately named combination pairing functional mushrooms with psilocybin called the Stamets Stack. Can you please explain how the benefits of psilocybin can be enhanced, specifically with lion's mane and niacin, a B vitamin, with relation to synergy?
Well, thank you. Let me, of course, spin back the clock here. I do have a species named after me, Psilocybe stametsii. I'm very honored. The field of mycology, you never can name a species after yourself. Different than you doctors, you can name a disease after yourself and go down in history. So it's a faux pas in the field of mycology. However, I decided to name it the Stamets Stack because I'm just tired of people ripping off my ideas, claiming them as their own, and not giving me any credit. I mean, we've all had that experience, right? Like really? So anyhow, I named it the Stamets Stack. And I'll go back to my PowerPoint here. And the Stamets Stack is a nootropic vitamin formula, and it's based on psilocybin, lion's mane, aranacines. It's using a 10th to a 20th of a gram of psilocybin mushrooms. 1 gram of psilocybin mushrooms is 10 milligrams. So 1/10 of a gram is 1 milligram. So that is sub threshold. I'll just go off of this because it's confusing. And so I stacked it with psilocybin, lion's mane, and niacin because psilocybin is a vasoconstrictor, increases heart rate slightly. Niacin is a vasodilator. And then I thought, well, neuropathy is oftentimes the deadening of the fingertips and the toes. So I believe that psilocybin would lead to neurogenesis. That was my premise. Back then, it was really not known. And so I thought, if the vascular system's collapsing, killing the nerves, and neuropathies occur, the deadening of the fingertips and the toes, if you could increase the vascular delivery of nutrients as nerves stay alive. And the other thing is, you take niacin, it's the flushing form, you start itching, your nerve endings are excited. So I thought, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Let's dilute the psilocybin to completely throughout the nervous system because you have that sensitivity. So I added lion's mane because lion's mane, if you go to mushroomreferences.com, has several small double-blind clinical studies showing a reduction in the progression of dementia, potential treatments for slowing down Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Based on a work from the Japanese scientist by the name of Kawagishi, who gets credit for this. He was actually looking for antibacterial compounds and stumbled into the fact that aranacines in the mushroom mycelium, not in the fruit bodies, have a strong influence on the expression of nerve growth factors that cause nerves to grow and regrow. Moreover, he found that it reestablished myelin on the axons of nerves. So it's an extraordinary discovery this Japanese researcher made. He got several patents on it. They've expired since then. But he really gets credit for sort of blazing the trail. So I thought, well, if you stack lion's mane with, if psilocybin increases neurogenesis, if lion's mane aranacines reestablish remyelination and amyloid plaque formations associated with Alzheimer's, interfering with neurotransmission, the myelin sheath conducts the signals along the axons of the nerves. So I thought for those 3 reasons, it dawned on me, oh my gosh, this combination could be really significant. And it turned out to be, we have really strong evidence. We've published twice now in Nature. And the first article that we published was a survey based on an app at microdose.me by a qualified citizen. Over 26,000 people are reporting their microdose activities. And we put in there also, because I popularized the Stamets Stack, if people were taking the Stamets Stack or not. And about 28% of the people who are stacking were using this formula. So we've got several hundred people using this formula. They're recording their visual acuity, their hearing, cognitive challenge tests, depression, anxiety. And we found something really amazing that was outside of subjectivity. The reason being, I'm not a psychiatrist, and I know quite a few psychiatrists now because of the psilocybin scene. And boy, they have to talk to patients about how they feel and their subjective feelings of anxiety, apprehension, depression. That's a muddy mess of indications. I'm a scientist that like to see, do something happens, right? I can see the correlation. So subjectivity and emotional distress is way beyond my depth. But I asked, when we designed this, we had all these tests the psychiatrists use for testing mental acumen and performance. And the one that stuck out, and when we did the data analysis, is, let me go back to here. This is the number of stackers, and we published in Scientific Reports. It's a Nature publication, the combination of these. And there was the TAP test, which is a validated finger tapping test. This is outside of subjectivity. What I wanted to see was, did we have a test that was not interpretive about how one feels, but actually their performance? And the TAP test is a psychomotor test that's given to Alzheimer's patients, Parkinson's patients. Those of you who had traumatic brain injuries, you know this test well. Many of those patients perform very poorly after a football concussion or something like that. But they gradually improve as neuroinflammation decreases, and most of them come back up the baseline. But Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, progressive dementia, doesn't happen. It's a slippery slope down. So it's a pretty good indication of neurodegeneration associated with trauma, disease, or age. And new news, we're all getting older. We all suffer from neurodegeneration in time. So this is over 100 papers talking about the TAP test. And this is the result that was totally astonishing. So basically, in the survey, we asked these people who were doing microdosing. We had about half the people in the survey, the first paper we published in Nature, I think on 4,500 non-microdosers, 4,300 or so microdosers. That was surprising to us that we had more non-microdosers enlisted in the testing than we had microdosers. I suspect it may have been citizen scientists who wanted to create their baselines, or they just found this as a convenient test. They're like, I'm not going to do microdosing, but hey, this is a great little test on an app that I can test my mental acumen. So when we compared with the 55-plus-year-olds, and this is important because neurodegeneration is a consequence of age. And so we carved out the data to 55-plus-year-olds, people who were taking no psilocybin at all, people who were taking psilocybin in any form except for the Stamets Stack, and then people who were taking the Stamets Stack, which you see in the green line. And the tapping frequency increased from 48 to 68 in 30 days. With a p-value of 0.004, that's one chance in 250. That's a random result. This is a strong signal. Now think about the confounders. They're getting the psilocybin on the black market. They're buying niacin from the store. How much niacin they're using? I suggested 50 milligrams, 1/10 of psilocybin mushrooms, 1/10 of a gram, 50 milligrams, 200 to 300 milligrams, up to 500 milligrams of lion's mane, mycelium. So that was a general parameters. But people do their variations. So you see variability in the underground psilocybin they're buying, variability in the niacin, variability in where they're getting the lion's mane mushrooms, and yet we see this signal. I mean, this is not subjective. This is a psychomotor benefit. And I looked into this more deeply, and anyone can do this. How many parts of the nervous system are involved in tapping your two fingers? I found at least six parts of your nervous system are involved. There's your brain, ideation, you're seeing, you touch, you feel the response of touching, rebound, you have the cadence, you have the frequency. And this is truly a strong signal. So then we started doing MAP kinase studies with something called TrkBs. This is a receptor that codes for neurogeneration, BDNF, brain-derived nerve factors. And sure enough, we found that the docking affinity, when you use the stack, increases the docking affinity to track bees, more so than the individual components by themselves added together. So we had synergy beyond the cumulative added contributions of those three compounds. So we found, wow, there is a synergistic reaction that is really exciting for us. So this is what we're pursuing now, is to disambiguate. And even the FDA agrees you don't have to prove the mechanism of action. All you have to prove is safety and benefit. Mechanisms of action, for us, an aspirin, no one knew how aspirin worked until I think the mid-1970s, right? But people were using it because it was safe. And, you know, of course, we have bleeding issues. Now we know about aspirin, but nevertheless, it showed a utility, and mechanism of action can be discovered later. So we're really excited because how many people fall when they're older? How many guitar players cannot teach their students because they can't play the guitar or the piano? How many older people can't code, can't type? I mean, so I think this is potentially preserve the body intellect of our society and preventing accidents, dementia. We're looking at using this for treating Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. This potentially is a game changer. So I intuited this, you know, from my experiences, my voyages, you might say, my journeys, and it just made sense to me. It's like, this makes sense, I'm going to try it. And so I postulated this as a hypothesis, and now the hypothesis has become a theory because we have actual evidence. So it's very, very exciting that we have these results.
Yeah, that is quite stunning, especially because there's ever-growing evidence in literature showing the benefits of psilocybin as it pertains to mental health conditions like anxiety and depression. But with this recently published work, you're now demonstrating psychomotor benefits in psilocybin having potential for improving physical performance. So that's quite exciting. Now, you've given a talk about the potential for mushrooms to save the bees. I would love for you to dive into ecology and the problem at hand and your potential solution.
This is a favorite subject of mine because, as I mentioned, I think the ecosystems and the healthy ecosystems are largely influenced by mycelium, setting up these relationships. So what I had is did some experiments. I was a mushroom grower and a beekeeper, and I noticed one day that my bees were attracted to my mushroom beds. I had mushroom beds of mycelium out in my garden. And one day I noticed when I was going out there that bees were flocking to my wood chips. I planted my mushroom mycelium and they moved them away. And I could see them sipping on these little exudate droplets oozing out of the mycelium. And for 40 days, from dawn to dusk, I had a constant convoy from my beehives to my mushroom beds. So it just like harvested all this mycelium. It was like milking a cow. So I thought, well, that's interesting. And my work with the BioShield program after 9/11 showed that our mycelial extracts were highly active in vitro against pox viruses, bird flu, and other flu viruses, as well as herpes. So this got a lot of attention. There's a National Public Radio interview with me and the director of the BioShield program, a virologist, and we had in the top 10, they said in the DoD press release, of more than 200,000 samples. In fact, it was more than 2 million samples. We're the only natural product in the top 10 active against pox viruses. So I was able to, because this mushroom called agarikon only grows in the old growth forest, I was able to advance the argument that we should save old growth forests as a matter of international defense. I still believe that's very much true. But I thought, okay, with bees, you know, and Apis mellifera, you know, came from Europe. It's a European honeybee. It grows in deciduous forests, thrives in those. So I looked at some mushrooms that grew in polypore mushrooms. These are wood conchs that grow in deciduous forests. And I focused on amadou and reishi. And then we published this in Nature. And this is a little bit bravado for us scientists, but many scientists are watching this, so you can relate. You publish an article, no one pays attention. Well, you know, okay, the article is still good. People just didn't get it. But this article is in the 0.1% of all articles ever published in the Nature publication ecosystem. Nature Physics, Nature Medicine, scientific reports, et cetera. So it's got a lot of bandwidth because with one treatment of the mushroom mycelium extracts, not the fruit bodies, harvesting those little exudates that I observed, put in the sugar water of honeybees, it reduced the deformed wing virus, but in this case, 879 to 1, the Lake Sinai virus, 45,000 to 1. So my co-authors with the USDA, Jay Evans, Steve Shepard from Washington State University, and Brandon Hopkins and others, we were able to set up an outdoor arena of beehives. So this is an animal clinical study. This is not inside the laboratory. This is outside the laboratory. So then we went and dosed them, with the placebo-controlled sugar water without the mushroom extracts. And sure enough, we were able to see these results. Massive reduction in viruses. Now, this is really important because the colony collapse now is sweeping the world. It's up to 50% in the United States now. Beehives are dying. The pollination services that bees provide us is about 25% of our food that we consume. So the loss of bees is a direct threat to worldwide food biosecurity, also ecological health. So this was kind of my epiphany. And surprisingly, there wasn't even though most of us grew up with Winnie the Pooh, and we know that the bears go into bee colonies and rotted trees, no one, I'm shocked by this, no one made the connection that bees went to wood because the mycelium gives them an immune benefit. I was the first one to make this. Now, since then, there's about 5 scientific articles that have come out that have also validated this with other bees. But this is one example of the intersection of mycelium and animal health. Bees are animals. So with the BioShield program, we showed it was active against bird flu, swine flu, pox viruses, herpes, herpes simplex, and numerous other viruses. So I really think that the mycelium of mushrooms, and particularly mycelium of polypores, is a deep reservoir of potentially new antiviral drugs, and this is where it's problematic, we haven't identified the molecule. Moreover, after more than 2 decades of looking for it, I'm not sure if there is a molecule. I think it could be a dance, an entourage, just like the Stamets Stack, where multiple ingredients are activating receptors, and the receptors are cross-talking, saying, okay, we want the organism you as a whole to survive. We have something that we can select for that can help immunity, and we're going to share that information with other receptors that can help us have neuroregeneration, or in this case, boost immunity to fight viral pathogens. I think it's a much more complicated than this magic bullet single directional approach. There's a symphony response that occurs, and these polypore mushrooms and even the psilocybin mushrooms, I think, elicit responses from multiple receptors, and cross-talking, I think, and the entourage effect is the way of life. I don't think it's the exception.
Brilliant. Now, let's talk about microdosing psilocybin, because dose matters. Now, a lot of the research that has come out from some of the top academic institutions like Johns Hopkins have looked at macrodoses, which seems to be important for rewiring and inhibiting the default mode network so that new connections can form and paradigm shift in perception is able to occur. So how do you think about comparing macrodoses versus microdoses and this ongoing conversation within the psychedelic community?
Well, the conversation is rapidly changing in favor of microdosing, which is really interesting to me. First of all, it's a spectrum, right? And you have individual sensitivities. I know people have taken 5 grams of psilocybin cubensis with no effect, and this person with him was on the floor, seeing God. I mean, so there's individual sensitivities here, and people on antidepressant medicines, SSRIs in particular, probably will have to take higher doses because their receptors are already somewhat occupied by these SSRI drugs. But the subject is, I mentioned track bees, and please look up these articles. They're very easily discoverable. But it turned out in 2022, I think there's about 30 authors on this article that said antidepressant drugs work because they bind with TrkB, the receptor. And that's why they work, because they're binding. Then an article came out this past year, about 20 authors, and Burton, you're familiar with it, I'm sure, that says psilocybin binds to TrkB 1,000 times more, 1,000 times more than SSRIs. Wow. At a macrodose. Well, where at 1x to 1,000x, and 1,000x, with a psilocybin high dose, where's a microdose? It's going to be more than one. It's going to be less than 1,000. It's going to be better than an antidepressant drug. So microdosing, I think, has a lot of an interesting future for testing and scientists. An article just came out yesterday with mice and the thalamus, showing that microdosing is helpful for avoidance of trained negative responses to negative stimuli. So there is a lot of research now looking at microdosing. And so let's look at what is a microdose. Well, a microdose could be as little as 0.1 milligrams of psilocybin, or even less, to 10 milligrams of psilocybin, which is a liftoff dose. Again, depending on your sensitivity, some people are sensitive at 10 milligrams, some people aren't, but everyone's not sensitive at 1 to 3 milligrams of psilocybin. You might feel a little bit better, but you're not intoxicated. So this is how I define a microdose: is it sub-intoxication, not sub-feeling, because you can feel better, in a better mood, colors a little bit brighter. Actually the act of breathing is interesting, as you have more in tune to your breath. These are things that you are more sensitized. I think your nervous system is more awakened. So that's not intoxication. That's just an enhanced state of consciousness. So when you alter consciousness to an intoxicating state, okay, that's no longer a microdose. That's a medium dose going into a macrodose. So many of the studies at 25 milligrams of psilocybin, Johns Hopkins, everywhere else that's been using those high doses, the question that's come to me is, how do we know that that's the optimal dose? I mean, how many receptors are occupied? What's the occupancy time for those receptors? Psilocybin could be 20% occupancy at a microdose, and much higher at a macrodose. So it's such a complex subject that, I don't use the adage, don't paint the canvas with one brush. And many scientists, I'm shocked. One group of scientists said that 1 to 4 milligrams of psilocybin is pharmaceutically inert. I mean, why would you even say that? It's one thing to say is that we don't know, and this could be a spectrum, and we're going to pursue this. But these didactic statements that are made speak to, I think, the hubris of scientists in general. I think it's really important that we be more circumspect, we be more open to new ideas. And this is a very, very rapidly changing subject that's deep in exploration right now. And we're also seeing the entourage effect of the other tryptamines, which are not intoxicating, enhancing receptor binding to these neuroreceptors. So this is interesting because not just psilocybin, baeocystin, norbaeocystin, norpsilocin, origenicin, they also bind to these receptors. So I'm very excited about the future. There's many researchers now exploring this. And if you think about microdosing or macrodosing, binding to TrkBs more so than any of these antidepressant drugs, this is the biggest threat to pharma of any new drug that has come on the scene in decades. So I think big pharma feels very threatened by this movement. And I think it's really important that we shepherd this knowledge very, very carefully.
Brilliantly put. Thank you. What are some of the challenges and misconceptions surrounding fungi that you've encountered in your career, and how do you address them?
Okay. I reserve the right to have my own opinion, as all of you do as well. Okay. So this is from my perspective. My father asked me for psilocybin mushrooms at the end of his life. Alexander Smith, at the end of his life, asked me for psilocybin mushrooms. Two giants in my life, and I turned them both down. The next day, I was taking off. They wanted to trip with me. Alexander Smith is published numerous new species of psilocybin mushrooms, a monograph on it. University of Michigan, professor emeritus in the field of mycology. He's a very big name. To have this elder wanting to trip with me when I'm 24 years of age was a huge endorsement. And I asked both of them if their wives would trip with us, and both of them said no. And I said, I'm not going to disrupt your life. I'm leaving the next day. If you have this amazing spiritual experience, you need somebody there to talk to you, to help you process, to explain it to your partner. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a mycologist. I turned them both down. And I have seen some people melt down, not from mushrooms that I ever gave, because I adopted the motto a long time ago, nature provides, I don't. I recently got a DEA license. I think part of the reason being I've been very disciplined about this. But this is a really important thing. So that some of the problems that I see, and again, this is my personal opinion, you have a responsibility. If you give somebody psilocybin mushrooms, you better be there for them. You just can't give it to them and sell it to them and walk away. That's irresponsible. What if the person has a meltdown? 30% of the people have a bad trip. 70% of people have a wonderful, life-changing trip. Some of the people who even have a bad trip, they can contextualize it later. And they said, yeah, it was a bad, horrifying experience, but I learned so much from it. So with a good therapist, you can make lemon out of lemonade. So that's one big concern I have. The other thing is, and this is going to unfortunately offend a few people, and I apologize in advance, but the underground psilocybin drug trade, they don't pay taxes. Their house burns down, they call the fire department. They're driving on public roads. Basically, they're freeloading. I would be wonderful if all these underground cultivators would commit to paying 30% of all their profits go to the public, to help nonprofits, to help the fire department, to help feeding people, the school system. But when people cloak themselves with they're doing something spiritual for the commons, and yet they don't pay back society monetarily, but they're making money and not paying taxes, I'm sorry, that just doesn't pass the sniff test to me. I think it's important. And I do think there are underground cultivators that do pay back society. So but there's no calculus here. There's no government oversight. I think we need government oversight, not inside your house, not for your family. You have the rights to your own consciousness. Whatever you do for yourself and your family is your business. I'm very much a libertarian. Keep the government out of your house. But once you do a transaction for money, we need government controls for quality so people don't get endotoxins. A lot of people don't know. A lot of these psilocybin mushrooms are rotting when they dry them, and they're full of endotoxins. This could cause, a toxic shock. This could actually put you in the hospital. Some people get massive stomach aches. It's not from the psilocybin binding with the receptors. It's from toxins that are in the psilocybin mushrooms. So these adverse events that are exacerbated by the psilocybin experience, I feel terrible, I feel sick. Now I'm tripping. Oh my God, I'm having a horrible experience. What is going on? We don't have safety controls in place that are absolutely necessary. Government controls can do that. The providers of psilocybin mushrooms should be CGMP. From my point of view, we're CGMP. It costs a lot of money to do that, but I'm absolutely confident in the quality of the products that are from CGMP facilities than somebody just making it in their closet. And then, the humidity is too high. People don't know this. The mushrooms come up, then verticillium starts growing on it. Mycogeny, bacteria start growing on it. Pretty soon you got a mushroom covered with fuzz and bacteria. People dry it and they sell it. They're selling something that's toxic. So are we going to allow people to self-police themselves? And, I'm not asking for law enforcement. I'm asking for food quality controls to be put into place that are already well established to prevent people from being poisoned. And I think quality control is really, really important. So those are two big issues with me. Can you tell?
Yeah,
So,
there's a lot of points, really good points that you made there. And especially as it pertains to setting, that unlike any other potential therapeutic, psychedelics really depend on mindset and the physical setting that someone is in, that you can't just take this medicine, that it's important to have a guide or someone who is experienced, especially at larger doses. And as far as the latter point that you made, my hope is that as we see certain states passing decriminalization measures, that you do start to have more control, more oversight as it pertains to safety. Once psilocybin becomes potentially regulated, descheduled, we'll have to see where that landscape goes.
we already have the system in place. We have the USDA and the certified organic programs in all the states. They're already doing food inspection. They're already inspecting mushroom farms. This is no big deal, folks. This is like, psilocybin mushroom facility. Let's use the same parameters to go make sure they have a good cleaning program, make sure they're controlling insects and aren't using toxic chemicals. This is like, this is very basic agricultural safety practices that are well established. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We just add an extra, inspection on our list of farms to inspect.
Yeah, that's quite a grounded perspective, I would say. So with that, let's get wild. What advice would you give to someone interested in foraging for mushrooms safely?
Join a mycological society. There's several of them. In the United States, there is the North American Mycological Association, Canada, United States, and Mexico. There's the International Mycological Association, IMA, which has, as you imagine, members all over the world. But you tap into these communities, and these are really interesting, nerdy, intelligent people. Many of them don't have higher degrees in education, but they're smart. They're really good at foraging and identification. So being mentored by somebody who already knows, it's really important. So get into the community of the mycological societies and associations, both the quote unquote amateurs and professionals. I mean, amateur is kind of a pejorative term because many of these people are not amateurs, they're actually professionally skilled. They just don't have a degree. So joining a mycological society or association is really good. Go to these mushroom congresses. There's a Telluride Mushroom Festival. There's the Mycological Society of America, MSA, which is more the professional organization. And there's these mycological societies are springing up all over the world. I've taught over 3,000 students, and I always ask them, every students who belongs to a mycological society, who doesn't. Oftentimes the refrain is, we don't have one in our area. I said, start one. You can go to a church room or a library room for $5 a night or nothing. You can gather, just put up advertisements at coffee shops. You give a little presentation on chanterelles and shaggy manes and morels, like the 12 easiest mushrooms to identify. And there's lobster mushrooms. Nothing looks like a lobster mushroom, and there's chanterelles, which are very unique. There's porcinis. So some of these best edible mushrooms is the simplest way of getting the public. And then they will bring in mushrooms which are a challenge for you to identify, but there'll be somebody else in the society that, I know what that is, and so you end up this little community of shared knowledge and experiences. And even though I'm a little bit left of center politically, I don't know if you could guess, but I have very dear, super conservative friends that I would frankly never have met them, but we came together and the mycological societies, and I've grown to love and respect them. I respect their point of view in a way I don't think I would have if I didn't have contact. You know, this whole concept of stranger danger, right? They're not like us, they're different. I'm afraid of them. And I just am really pleased because I've also, I think, converted a few of them to the more pro-environmental, protect the ecosystem. You protect the ecosystem, you're protecting the mushrooms that you're collecting, right? And who wants to collect more mushrooms? We all do. And mushroom patches are generational, as I mentioned. They're in Italy and France and Russia, Mexico, they're handed down one generation to another. And they're like the family's secret mushroom patch. And with these species, once you find them, they can be there for perhaps hundreds of years, or certainly many, many generations. So the favorite stories I've heard from elderly people when they're 80s, literally, is that when they were young toddlers walking with their parents and grandparents through the woods collecting mushrooms. They're quiet, they're with the family, they have their attention, the kids are closer to the ground, they can find more. You can't be poisoned from the most deadly poison of the mushroom from touching it, right? So you should wash your hands afterwards, but don't touch your eyes and pick your nose. But literally, there's extremely low risk. So my daughter, when she picked up Galerana autumnalis, also known as Venata, and one of those deadly poisonous mushrooms in the world, I would say, oh my gosh, you just picked one of the deadliest poisonous mushrooms in the world. I'm so excited. Really? And so then she came to learn, oh, okay, this is great. And I said, only mommy and daddy cook mushrooms. All mushrooms should be cooked. And that just removed this idea of you don't eat raw mushrooms. And so I pass this on to my children, and they always know that, you know, mushrooms should be cooked. And at that time, as toddlers, they didn't put mushrooms into their mouths because they knew they had to be cooked first.
Awesome. Yeah, those were some really strong recommendations. I understand that you are the co-director of a novel nonprofit called the Center for Ecological Consciousness. Can you please share its mission and what you hope to achieve with this organization?
Well, thank you so much. And I normally at the beginning of my talks, I like to acknowledge the indigenous people, the unceded lands of the Cooloots people in British Columbia. This is where I am. And thankfully we are here because of their generosity and kindness. And this property behind me is where the Center for Ecological Consciousness is going to be stationed. We're a 501(c)(3) or at ecologicalconsciousness.org. It's a teacher of teachers platform because I came to my epiphany about saving bees because I'm a beekeeper and a mushroom grower. That Venn intersection brought together, you know, my talents that came to this breakthrough, I think. Well, how many other breakthroughs are there? So the best example I can give is the woodpecker. Why would a woodpecker bang its head against a tree? Well, there's more than 100 species of fungi that have been isolated from the beak of a woodpecker. So when a woodpecker bores a hole into a tree, it inoculates the tree, the mycelium starts to grow. The mycelium then is fragrant, it's delicious, it attracts insects. Insects lay eggs, they become larvae, and they then consume more of the mycelium. As the mycelium grows out, the woodpeckers have a memory to go back to that tree, and then they can harvest insects. They hollow out the tree to create a cavity. Now cavity dwellers come in, like squirrels, the spotted owl or owls, other animals. So what did I just describe? Ornithology, the bird, mycology, the fungi, botany, the tree, zoology with the animals. So this is what I think is wonderful, is to get specialists who have deep knowledge, but how does that knowledge integrate within the mosaic of the ecosystem? So the Ecological Consciousness, the Center, CEC, is designed in principle to bring scientists together to overlap their specialties and to become teachers of teachers to integrate the biological sciences. So there's cross pollination, sporulation between these different disciplines, because I think these integrated platforms are really the way of the future for homeostasis of ecosystems, for enhancing ecosystem health, for enhancing our own health, because we are residents in the habitat that's given us birth. By increasing the health of the habitat, we prevent zoonotic diseases. It helps us all become better people. And then there's something else. As I believe science and spirituality are converging, I'm an amateur astronomer what astronomer out there does not feel more spiritual? I mean, every astronomer speaks of the deep reverence they have and understanding the depths of the universe. This is very important. Religions are silos that are governed by language constructs, ethnicities, roots, all that's good. But they all struggle to come to the same point, and respecting the unanimity of being that we all share. And this is where I think psilocybin opens up the windows to be able to understand better that we really are all one people, and we all are one cell in a giant universal organism. And I think that gives me a lot more solace about my own mortality. From the matrix of soil I was born, and into the soil I return. And my molecules will disassemble to atoms perhaps, but I'll reassemble. And that reassembly and the reforming of us as we become another corporeal form is the continuum of life as it's been known for billions of years.
That is beautiful. Now, I do have a couple questions remaining for you. With COVID cases on the rise, there is a randomized controlled trial listed on the clinicaltrials.gov website looking at a mushroom-based natural product to enhance the immune response to COVID-19 vaccination. Are you aware of this trial? Do you know what mushrooms are involved? And if you are aware, what is your take on this study?
Yeah, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov, and it's agarikon, that mushroom that I described from the BioShield program, and turkey tail, which I also described. Both lots of references at mushroomreferences.com. And we supplied agarikon and turkey tail mycelium for the COVID study. The preliminary results were just released a week ago at George Washington University School of Medicine. It's up on the web right now for the next day or two. I think it'll take it down. Our team is submitting an article to a well-known medical journal. So the results are just preliminary, and we couldn't release too much information that sabotages it for publication. But the results were, the design of the experiment was to see whether medicinal mushrooms could enhance mRNA vaccines. And the results, if you go to that website and see the results, are pretty profound. And the answer, based on the preliminary evidence, this is a randomized placebo-controlled clinical study of 90 people, recruited literally at the time where they're getting the vaccines, mRNA vaccine from Pfizer or Moderna. And they were solicited by University of California, San Diego physicians and their team members to say, you want to be part of a medicinal mushroom clinical study with a placebo. And people enlisted very readily. And the results are just fantastic. So, so the answer putatively and tentatively, again, more research needs to be conducted, larger clinical trials. But the significance values from reducing adverse effects of the vaccine are highly significant. And moreover, there is a signal of extending antibody response and duration beyond the mRNA vaccine by itself. So that's really interesting. So one thing I didn't know, the immunologist, Stephen Wilson, This is not part of our of the presentation. I made a presentation also at George Washington University, the rationale for choosing agarikon and turkey tail. They did the clinical work. But what he told me was so fascinating, which I did not know. These are called receptor binding domains. And what he told me was so surprising. If you're immunologically depressed and you get a vaccine, the antibody expression benefit from the vaccine is very limited compared to somebody who has a good intact immune system. People who have a good intact immune system, their antibody response is much more robust. So the question becomes, would taking medicinal mushrooms enhance your immune system so you have more binding sites for the expression of antibodies? And that's what we think is a working hypothesis right now, is that, and what he told me that was so surprising is immunologically depressed people, when they take a vaccine, because there are limited antibody response and protection, allows variants of the virus to evolve. So those who are immunologically depressed who are taking vaccines become a breeding ground for vaccine evasion. And so you want to squash that virus as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that is quite fascinating. And this conversation has been quite incredible. I have one more question for you, and that is, can you please share a particularly surprising or unexpected discovery that you have made in your fungal research?
Well, there's been a lot of them. One that was quite surprising to me is I tried to control carpenter ants in my home. And I grew up in the mycelium of an entomopathogenic fungus. It's related to cordyceps. Many people know about cordyceps. It's called metarhizium. And I knew metarhizium would infect insects. Anybody watched ants, and they're constantly cleaning themselves. Metarhizium is one of the most common fungi in the soil. This dance between metarhizium and insects is going on for tens of millions of years. They understand and smell a pathogen. So I had carpenter ants in my house, and the spores repelled the insects because they're not stupid. They can smell these spores. They know it's a pathogen. So when I cultured it in a laboratory, I got these white sectors of mycelium that were non-sporulating. I thought, well, spores repel. What will the mycelium do? Whoa, I hit the big home run on that. So I found out that the mycelium, prior to sporulation, attracts the very insects that are repelled by that fungus's spores. So it becomes like a Trojan horse that could attract the workers. It goes past the guards, is given to the queen of termites and carpenter ants, lots of other insects as well. And then poof, the entire colony then sporulates. And then the spores then repel. So for about 25 cents a house, you can repel termites and carpenter ants. I got 5 patents on this. All the patents have expired. Patents are a blueprint. Anybody can do this if you've got any laboratory skills. Of course, you can't sell it. It has to be regulated. But again, in your own house, I think you have the right to do that. So that was like, wow, if this was such a big, and it's studied for about 50 years, no other scientist came up with this. How many other discoveries? And this is what I'm involved in, is applied mycology. Using mycology and applying it for problems that are critical today, to protect water tables from insecticides, to be able to protect the most valuable investment in your life, your house, all the ramifications. What is surprising to me is that the field of mycology is not funded as well as the computer sciences, as the botany departments. I mean, the field of mycology has such enormous implications that I'm excited about what's yet to be discovered. And it's happening every few weeks or months. There's another major breakthrough, breaking down plastics, for instance, utilizing a wide number of fungi we know can break these things down, as well as other toxins. Be able to build structures on Mars out of mycelium that design and nanowires that become batteries. So not only you have the habitat structure of the astronauts living on Mars, but the house itself, it could become a massive battery. I mean, there's just so many implications. We received a NASA grant, and we found that mushrooms can break down regolith and then be able to break it down into soil that can grow plants. So this is where the power of mycelium should not be underestimated. It's just we're just at the beginning of this, of the threshold of our understanding and appreciation of fungi in the world.
Incredible. And I appreciate you and for being a knowledge keeper and for sharing some of your wisdom with us today. For those that are tuning in live and listening to the recording, you can learn more about Paul and his work by going to just some of his websites, inclusive of fungi.com as well as hostdefense.com. He also has a startup called Mycomedica. I want to turn it back to you, Paul, to share any additional closing thoughts or remarks, a takeaway message perhaps for our listeners.
Fundamentally, I believe people are good. Fundamentally, I think the forces of nature are good. I think we have a lot of challenges that's related to greed, short-term thinking. And what I love about psilocybin is it's helping people to have a paradigm shift in consciousness. And this is what's needed for us to save our future. Whatever your religious beliefs, whatever your political beliefs, we all share in common that we want a better future for our children. We can only do that through collaboration. I've long believed that evolution is not the survival of the fittest, but the sharing of resources beyond your own needs, the sharing of surplus. And when you share and reach a hand to help others, they just by nature, they have a debt of gratitude. You did something not because you wanted to get something in return, but the person receiving it is so thankful. They know that you're a friend and an ally, and when you're in trouble, they're going to be more motivated to help you. It's the reciprocity of generosity that I think drives creating these guilds, just like the mycelium, that bring us together, because our collective wisdom, our biodiversity, the complexity of our diversity gives us all these skill sets in our biological tool chest to address catastrophia. And I think we're at a time critical that every action that we take reverberates into the future. Psilocybin can bring us together to create a paradigm shift in consciousness. That's what's needed. And I think psilocybin is a medicine for our time.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much for your time today, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I very much look forward to seeing you again whenever we shall meet. Take care.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Take care.